Jerusalem, perhaps the most religious city in the world, claimed by all three of the great monotheistic faiths. It is associated with an imageless worship of the supreme deity, whom the Greeks called Yah-oh. It's hard to imagine that this city was once a place where pork was sold in the meat markets, where the healing god Asclepius was enshrined by the pools of Bethesda, and where Jupiter Capitolinus was enthroned on the Temple Mount. But this Jerusalem did exist for well over 200 years in the Roman period, between about 130 and 363 of the Common Era. This was a time when Jerusalem was not even called Jerusalem, but Aelia Capitolina. In this Jerusalem, the language on the street was, for the most part, Greek. Many inscriptions were in Latin, and a vast Roman military camp, the 10th Legion, was a stone's throw away. And, apparently, in the whole city, there was not so much as a synagogue. In fact, if we believe the witness of the Church Fathers, Jews themselves were not able to come near Jerusalem. Ariston of Pella reportedly said that the Emperor Hadrian commanded that by a legal decree and ordinance, the whole nation of the Jews or Judeans should be absolutely prevented from entering even the district around Jerusalem, so that not even from a distance could they see their native soil. Eusebius emphasized that no Jews lived in Jerusalem's vicinity after 135. The area was colonized entirely by foreigners, and Justin Martyr even claims that in his day, about 155 of the Common Era, a Jew would be executed if he or she entered Jerusalem. Astounding as it might seem, Jews were, at least at this point, excluded from their own mother city, and the Romans colonized their capital with foreign settlers who were attracted with the promise of land grants, tax favors, and Roman citizenship. And yet, the Roman who refounded the city, the Emperor Hadrian, probably thought that he was doing the Judeans a favor. Since the summer of 70, the burnt-out husk of the Jewish temple lay in smoldering ruins on the high point of the city. The roads were damaged, the walls were thrown down, public buildings were destroyed, and the population was dwindling. The Jews had petitioned the imperial administration for a long time to have their temple rebuilt. Their cause was not helped by a massive revolt of diaspora Jews between 115 and 117 CE. It was at the end of this conflict that Hadrian, it seems, visited Jerusalem for the first time, and perhaps it was at this point, the very year Hadrian became emperor in 117, that he decided to rebuild a city in honor of the Judean Lord. But Hadrian, heir of Hellenic culture and one of its greatest representatives, probably imagined that the Judean god was another form of his own high god, Jupiter or Zeus. Some liberally minded Jews of the time may have agreed with him, at least as a concession. But Simon Bar Kosiba, renamed Bar Kokhba, and his cohort strongly disagreed. He and his followers were horrified that their city would be lavishly rebuilt, but in honor of the wrong Lord of Heaven, the one whom Homer called Cloud Gatherer. They demanded that the worship of their local Jupiter, whom they considered to be the only one, be without images and according to the particular system of sacrifices and purifications laid out in the Torah, a system not in any way agreeing with Roman ritual. How much Hadrian understood Bar Kokhba's point of view is a matter of debate, but he clearly made a political miscalculation. His lavish investment for a new Jerusalem, a new holy city, was to be threatened by the outbreak of a 3-year war, a war which cost the Romans the lives of thousands. The Roman historian Cassius Dio wrote that the Bar Kokhba War was spurred on by Hadrian's establishment of a colony on the ruins of Jerusalem and his decision to build a temple to the Roman Jupiter with Roman rites and Roman citizens. Eusebius reverses the direction of causation, saying that Hadrian decided on the colony after he won the war, but Eusebius was probably theologically motivated to think that the colony was a divine punishment against Jewish rebels. Both Epiphanius and the Chronicon Paschala, a 7th century Byzantine chronicle, say that the city of Aelia Capitolina was founded over a decade earlier than the Bar Kokhba War, and modern archaeology shows that reconstruction of the city's infrastructure started earlier than the 130s of the Common Era. Most scholars now date the official founding of the city to Hadrian's visit to Jerusalem on his way to Egypt in the year 130. Hadrian would return to the city at the end of the Bar Kokhba War. When Hadrian won the war, he completed his colony. If he was ever open to the idea of respecting Jewish rites and theological traditions, by this point he had completely given up on the idea. After 135, Jerusalem was to be a Roman city, a Roman colony with a Roman name, Aelia Capitolina. Aelia being a reference to Hadrian's own family name, and Capitolina meaning that the new city was dedicated to the Capitoline triad, Jupiter surrounded by Juno and Minerva, or in Greek, Zeus, Hera, and Athena. The deity of highest honor was Jupiter Capitolinus. Dio Cassius describes a temple of Jupiter erected by Hadrian in the city, but scholars disagree on how to translate his Greek. They propose either the translation that, and on the site of the temple of God, he or Hadrian raised a new temple to Jupiter, or alternatively, instead of the temple of God, he raised a new temple to Jupiter. If the latter translation is preferred, then the temple to Jupiter could have been anywhere in the city, such as the Roman Forum west of the Temple Mount, near the site of what is now the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. In my view, Dio's grammar and independent external evidence indicates that the first translation is correct. The temple to Jupiter was on the Temple Mount. In 333 of the Common Era, the Bordeaux pilgrim saw some sort of sanctuary, shrine, or temple, the Latin word ides, and 2 statues of Hadrian on the Temple Mount. A fragment of a Latin inscription inscribed with the name of Antoninus Pius probably originally belonged to the statue of this emperor that also stood on the Temple Mount. And Jerome records a statue of Jupiter in addition to a statue of Hadrian on horseback, both located on the Temple Mount. The Chronicon Paschala refers to a triple vaulted structure, a tricameron, which may also refer to Jupiter's temple. It is reasonable to conclude that some sort of cultic place, a temple to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, was constructed on the highest point of Aelia Capitolina, what we now know as the Temple Mount. But even if Hadrian only placed his statues there, these cult statues of himself as the divine emperor would have been enough for both Jews and Christians of the time to abominate. The Gospel according to Mark, chapter 13, verse 14, refers to a quote-unquote abomination of desolation, standing where it ought not to be. And the Gospel according to Matthew clarifies that the abomination was standing in the holy place. The reader is called out and is supposed to know exactly what this abomination is. It could be a temple or simply a statue standing on the Temple Mount. Whatever we choose, this abomination would only have stood on the Temple Mount after the founding of Aelia Capitolina, about the year 130. And this is where it gets interesting, because the Gospel according to Luke does not refer to an abomination of desolation, only to the desolation of Jerusalem when she is surrounded by military camps, a description that well fits the situation of Jerusalem in the summer of 70 CE. The reading in Marcion's Gospel is substantially the same, assuming that both Marcion's Gospel and canonical Luke both depend on a prototypical Gospel. Why would this Gospel writer remove the reference to the abomination of desolation? Well, perhaps he didn't. Perhaps he didn't know about Mark's abomination of desolation tradition, because he was in fact the first Gospel writer to put pen to paper, not dependent on Mark. It was Mark, and following him, Matthew, who, at least in the edited stage of their Gospels, added the abomination into Jesus' apocalyptic discourse. This would mean that Mark and Matthew, in the forms we have them, at least, must be later than the year 130, when the temple and or statue of Zeus or Hadrian as divine emperor was set up on the Temple Mount. The prototypical Gospel would then date anywhere between 70 and 130. Let's talk about the gods worshipped in Hadrian's Jerusalem. Cyril of Jerusalem coyly refers to the worship of Asclepius around the pool of Bethesda, the site where Jesus reportedly healed a lame man, according to John 5. In this vicinity, a marble foot was found, inscribed by Pompeia Lucilia, and reportedly the shrine to Asclepius featured a figure, and next to it a serpent. The figure may have represented Serapis, the Egyptian deity. A Latin dedication to Jupiter Serapis was found in the old city of Jerusalem, dated back to 117. Evidence for the existence of Dionysus' worship, and possibly that of Mithras, is provided by small finds, including reliefs and ornamentation on pottery, coins, and gemstones set in rings. Other gods worshipped in Aelia included Astarte and the Dioscuri, who appear on the city's coinage. In the Forum, there was also a sizable temple to the Roman Venus. Eusebius says that Constantine, in the early 4th century, ordered the destruction of this temple when the tomb of Jesus was revealed beneath it. In Syria and Phoenicia, Venus or Aphrodite was often identified with Tyche, or divine fortune, and she appears on about 40% of the city coins as the protector of Aelia, often wearing the city crown and sometimes with the 10th Legion standards. Her 6-pillared temple is depicted on a coin of Antoninus Pius. Today, it's honestly hard to imagine Jerusalem as a city with little to no Jews, and full of the sweet smell of burning sacrifices to Hellenic and Roman gods. But such was Aelia Capitolina. When we think about recovering the heritage of Jerusalem, we often think about recovering its Jewish heritage. I wonder why we don't also think of recovering its quote-unquote pagan, or better, Hellenic heritage. After all, the city had many stages of history. When it was a Canaanite town before David supposedly conquered it, this sacred Salem knew nothing of Yahweh or Yahweh. At the height of the Roman Empire, it was not as if the Romans intended to exclude Yahweh from Jerusalem. They did not intend to antagonize a local deity or a local manifestation of their deity. Yahweh was simply worshipped under another name, Zeus or Jupiter. Today, as we speak, God is still worshipped in Jerusalem with the unpronounceable name of the Tetragrammaton, as well as with other names like Adonai, El, and Allah. It's worth knowing, however, that he was once called Jupiter, and that Jupiter, too, had a place in Jerusalem. He was not just a myth found in a handbook, a pagan god that could be dismissed with a shrug. Jerusalem was, at one time, a pagan city. It was pagan before David. It was pagan for 2 centuries after the Bar Kokhba revolt. And who knows, in the long span of human history, it might one day be pagan again.